Okay, and I believe we are live. So give me a sec. Welcome everyone. Welcome to Quick Connect Live, this place where we share, learn, and grow together as a community. And we meet fortnightly to discuss personal development topics ranging from psychometric tools to psychological methods to performance hacks. So it's hosted by me, Jeffrey, and Ethan. And today we're covering the topic of accepting our traumas to let go. So I'll be a host today. That's why I'm doing the introduction. Jeffrey will be your scribe. He'll be scribing out mural, and Ethan would be our main facilitator for today. So just a quick introduction of myself. My name is Alex. I help people to discover, decipher, and develop their talents and strengths so they can maximize their performance at work, improve relationships, and increase overall well-being. I represent Strengths Alchemy. So I do coaching, training, and facilitation. Right. So over to you, Ethan.
Wait, we shouldn't Jeffrey introduce first. Then I can take over.
Okay.
Come on, Jeffrey.
Oh, yeah.
Thanks, Ethan. I'm Jeffrey. I help leaders discover their potential and actually help them to better effectively lead their teams and navigate the system in the public service. Yeah, so that's what I do mainly. So over to who should I appoint?
Go back to me first, and then I'll hand over to the rest of the people. Hi, everybody. I'm
Right,
Ethan. Yeah. As you can tell, I'm not officially back in any space of personal development right now. I'm focusing on the cybersecurity training school, but my focus has always been culture of companies, developing people in terms of helping them get past, well, as today's topic is, their traumas. And that's actually been a topic of mine since I was young. I went to psychiatry, medical school, especially trying to fix this, only to realize they don't fix it because they do drugs. No, they do medicine, not drugs, sorry. So I branched out to really build an understanding of how to understand this whole concept around psychology and traumas and things like this. And so today I'm going to be sharing a bit more about what I discovered about letting go. Trauma is a huge topic on its own, and a lot of people talk about it, but it's a different story for people to actually deal with it. It's a very scary thing for a lot of people. So today, I'm trying to make it understandable, appetizing, at least not losing your appetite about dealing with it, and hopefully it can get people forward in a certain new direction. But before I go there, I think we should have a round of introduction of all the different people, right? Alex?
Yep. Let's do that. So any questions you want them to share as part of the introduction?
Actually, one of my favorite questions to ask in this scenario would be, what do you know about trauma? Like, just at least give a basic, like, I deal with it all the time, or I don't even open up the conversation on trauma.
Okay, so what they understand trauma to be, for example.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So introduce your name, what do you do, and just what do you understand about trauma, right? Your basic understanding and knowledge about it. So let's start with, I'm going to put Yura on the spot, if you are available.
Yes. Why do I sense I was supposed to be the first? Okay. Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure to join you guys on time. I'm Yura. I'm Yurida. You can call me Yura. Yurida. My top 5. You want me to share top 5? No need. No, it's okay.
You can always share your top 5. Yes, that would be great.
Positivity achiever, connectedness developer, and activator. So you can sense I'm multitasking. I'm with my son, and I am tuning in. So what do I understand about trauma? It's a lot to do with an extreme experience that one went through. It could be something from childhood that they understand, and then they just live with it. So it really would affect them. I know people of going through some interesting experiences, and I think it could be because of childhood trauma. So happy to really discover more from you guys, experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Yura. Please pick the next person.
Let's invite Chris.
Hey, Chris. Please introduce yourself, what you do.
Hi guys, Chris here. So I'm in the fund industry. Right now I'm preparing to launch my fund in Singapore, focusing on stock investing, um, for growth, but in a sustainable manner. I think the trauma means different thing to different people. It basically is very specific and subjective to the individual, and it's something not to be taken lightly, but it's something that can be dealt with or can be overcome with the right tools and the right thinking mindset and also the right community. Yeah, that's my 2 cents. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Pick the next person.
Alex.
Okay. So I've already introduced myself. What do I think of trauma? I think trauma are generally events, oftentimes single events, could be one time, where it's very emotionally charged that leaves a very deep imprint onto a person. And growing up, it often becomes subconscious, meaning that we may not even be aware that we are acting based on certain traumas or beliefs or fears, and it becomes very, what's that? It's not nefarious, right? It's subconscious but negative. So when we start to unpack some of these things, it becomes easier to, I guess, because it's subconscious, we can only deal with it when we start becoming conscious of it. And then we will talk about the process of accepting and letting go and stuff like that. So that's my understanding of trauma. So I will pick Zining to go next.
Hey, thank you. I'm the one that do drugs in this group. So those who met me the last session, I'm actually a pharmacist. My top 5 are deliberative, connectedness, input, strategic, and responsibility. Yeah, so I am a Gallup certified coach as well. Yeah, although I'm not actively coaching. Yeah, it's just that I use concepts as part of my work. What's trauma? I think it's negative experiences that have an impact on people. Yeah, that will stay with you unless there's intervention to help you to emerge from it. Yeah, I think the keyword here is really negative. Yeah, in a way.
Thanks, Zining. So we are left with Corinne. Quick introduction and what you understand about trauma.
I have no idea what my top 5 are. I probably did it some time ago, but I give it all back to the teacher. So I'm a comms person in the hospitality industry. Have been a comms person all my life. I think trauma can be either physical or emotional. And mostly I feel that if they're not addressed, then it spills over to all aspects of your life in the way that you react or in your relationships that can cause a bigger impact in your life. That's why I understand.
Thanks, Corinne. So I think before we get into the main topic, maybe a little bit of context for those who are joining us for the first time of how we got here today. So like what Zining suggested right at the beginning of the call, that we started off exploring this whole concept of anti-values, right? So what are they, how do they come up, and how anti-value is different from a value. And one of the key differences being in that if you had an anti-value, you often look for it, you often get it, and you often can't let go of it when you see it in other people, right? So for example, if the value is honesty, the anti-value might be anti-lying, right? You'll be looking for people lying to you, or you get really, really, really upset with people who are lying, right? But if you will focus more on a value of honesty knows that that's what you want, but you aren't as negatively impacted when you are lied to or when you see someone else lying, right? Because the focus on a value actually gives space to allow other people to kind of behave the way they behave, right? Ethan, please correct me if I'm wrong.
And that's a very good way of looking at it, yes.
So that's one of the things that we discussed in the past 2 sessions. If you'd like to kind of recap, go back and watch those 2 videos. And today's session really is a follow-up from those, right? Because we do start to realize that a lot of our values, anti-values, does stem a little bit from trauma, right? Or things that has happened to us since we were young and things like that, that becomes embedded as part of our personality. So today's conversation is a follow-up from that, whereby we start talking about, okay, so what trauma is, and then how do we let go and how do we accept and things like that, right? So Ethan, back to you.
Okay, so I did lock down. I love how Jeffers also locked down everybody's comments. But I did lock down what everybody said because I was like, okay, great. This is where we're starting from, because it's very important that we start looking at traumas in a slightly different way, because this is actually what I really am interested in, because we think of it as a very severe thing. My favorite realization about trauma for myself is that it's innocuous. And when I say innocuous, it's where so we talk about like the single events that are emotionally charged or can be overcome, like significant, like a lot of significance, extreme events. You know what can qualify as a significant event to a baby in terms of what creates a trauma? Anybody like what do you think? Yeah.
Crying and not getting a response.
Precisely. Parents ignoring the child while the child is crying. To a child, there's extreme experience that actually traumatizes the kid. All the parents, sorry, this is just the reality of what it is. It is impossible to avoid trauma in humanity, in human experience. Everything that we desire, everything that we believe, everything we believe of ourselves, and everything actually very often originates from the concept of trauma. And so when we look at trauma, we look at it as when we are lacking something that we are asking for or need, and we are trying to figure out the rules of engaging what's happening, that's when we actually form traumas. So let me simplify what I just said by saying it's actually a child's conclusion of a situation that they do not understand. That's the simplest way of describing a trauma. So when I talk about this, right, this is actually really interesting, because what is a child that is crying with parents that ignore him or her? What's the conclusion that very often they will have?
But this definition of trauma actually kind of time limits it, that trauma only happens or you incur trauma as a child, right? So
actually it does. It's so interestingly, anything that happens afterwards does not form traumas, but it might I mean, there are certain things that can cause traumas much later on, but it requires a lot of things. But a lot of it does source from the first 7 years. And this is a lot of the brain development related stuff. We're talking about fixed rules. There's a reason why this, and I want to delve a bit further into this. But let's just go back to the baby. What's the conclusion that the baby has when the parents don't come to feed when he or she is hungry? Anybody who wants to try?
Let me point to Yura again, since Yura is on maternity right now and she has a baby to take care of.
Perfect.
So what happens to the baby when I don't feed him? Oh my God, all hell break loose. Do you want to hear him? Well, he gets very upset and he'll be crying very, very hard, tears coming out, and a bit traumatic because when up to a certain period of time, the breathing gets very fast, and then you can see, like, he's not looking at you, he's just like looking upwards. I think it could be traumatizing for a child, yeah?
Absolutely. And that's exactly what I mean. What you'll get is what we term as an extreme response, the feeling of life or death.
And there's a physiological response, right? The faster breathing and everything.
Absolutely. So if you look at this, right, there is a conclusion. So anybody here who also owns pets? Anybody here who has pets? Nobody. Okay, interesting. Great. Okay. One of the biggest rules that we have about dogs, because I have 2 dogs at home, one of them belongs to my sister, one of them belongs to my brother. And one of the biggest rules that my sister learned about scolding dogs: if you scold a dog about something that he or she did 2 hours ago, the dog will think that it's about the previous thing that he or she did. It's a very interesting thing. So if you look at okay, so let's also break down how the brain works. Huh? Before the forebrain came about, there's a midbrain and hindbrain. So there's the parts of our brain that are primitive and does quick conclusions about the different situations that we have, with no ability of the conscious mind to edit it. That's usually what animals behave like, sadly. Not sadly, but it's just what it is, right? Like the way they behave is because they lack the forebrain to be able to edit it. So what happens is that the dog would think that the dog running after you to lick you was the reason why it scolded, rather than because they peed on your sofa 2 hours ago. Now, when a dog gets scolded by an owner, what does the dog feel like? And especially the owner, the person who feeds the dog, the person who takes care of the dog, Have you seen how dogs feel when they're being scolded? See how they look like?
They crawl into like a small position and they make a sound that is so poor thing, right? I think.
They whine and they Corinne?
No, they just look at you like they know they did something wrong.
They look very guilty and they look very sad, right?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Very often the response is a feeling of life or death for them as well. So that's what I realized for a number of dogs. I mean, if some random person scolds a dog, they will just bark. Just go after that person. But if it's the owner, it's a different story. There's a reason for this. Because their relationship with the parents or the owners is life or death to them. So objectively, the definition of all traumas, actually for me, is conclusions made about the relationship with, I'll use the word parents or caregivers to be exact, because it can be your grandparents, it can be whoever, that decides life or death. So some of you who feel like you have to take care of the next person, it's probably because you felt like if you probably in childhood had to reach out to your parents to take care of them or to show us a kind of concern for them to respond to you. If not, you feel neglected altogether. And what happens is that you have a conclusion in your head that repeats that pattern over and over again. Most of the traumas that we talk about in adulthood are what I term as compound traumas. Let me just explain a bit more. So I'm throwing this all in because that's why I went into anti-values. Because anti-values within itself is a simple trauma. It simplifies the concepts of what you're experiencing. What most people have are, most of the time, compound traumas. Why do people like abusive relationships? Familiarity, right? Very often there's a familiarity about the abusive relationship over and over again. They are. I remember this wonderful term that my friend just reintroduced to me today. It's called the dramatic triangle. The drama triangle, right? Like where you have the abuser, the savior, and the victim. And the person is always the victim. They always have the abuser, they always have the savior. They're always looking for somebody to save, and they're always complaining that somebody is hurting them. And then there's always this other person who saves them, but then they play no part in any of the stories. Right? So that is a result of what I term as compound traumas, meaning it's anti-value support, anti-value support, anti-value support, anti-value support, anti-values. The reason why I like the word anti-value is because I can be very specific about the trauma that you experienced in childhood that allows you to deal with it. So compound traumas very often comes about because it's re-triggered small traumas. What happens is that memory starts interweaving with other traumas. So what happens is that I had to take care of my parents. Okay, so for example, if I had to take care of my parents or show concern to my parents to receive any attention, to receive what I need, which is what I view as love or support along the way. If not, they ignore me all the time. I got used to this, right? I need to give love in order to receive love. So I need to keep giving to them. If a child thinks that that is the way to think, then they add on all the different responses. So if I give them food, they'll give me food back. So then the conclusion is food is a showcase of love. That's a compound trauma. That's the next layer on top of I need to give food in order to receive love. So that's what we term as a compound trauma. So then there's a relational experience between food and love, and then giving food equals survival, therefore, So if I grow up and my parents told me a story like 3-4 years old that money leads to food, food leads to thing, I might make a conclusion that money is directly related to food, which is related back to being loved. Therefore, I might need to give my family non-stop money for the rest of my life in order for me to feel like I can feel their love at the end of the day. So there are mindsets like this that I've seen, I've helped people with, that there are compound layers of memories that leads to where they are. Any questions, or is this too confusing, or is this like something that really jars against you guys?
Ethan, maybe I ask a question.
Sure.
So I was thinking around like when we start to form meanings, right? Because what it sounds like to me was also a bit like is you say compound layers of memories. Is it also like how people keep associating different meanings and it gets built up? And when it becomes unhealthy to you, that's when you start to form the different type of mindsets lah. So I wonder whether that has a role to play in that as well.
Perfect question. Have you noticed how when people ignore them? Okay, so one of my favorite things is, how many of you would worry what the other person says if you were to go and meet somebody new and you start worrying about, oh no, the conversation is going to be bad, or oh no, I don't know what's going to happen next. Anybody has particular worries about meeting new people or that kind of anxiety?
Only if the person was someone I was kind of looking to date or something like that.
Okay, so for you, it's date, right? So there's a relational experience, there's a tying in on the level.
And because there's more at stake, right? In terms of like, oh, that's a person like me.
So that's the interesting part, right? That's a disproportional response to just meeting somebody. So if we look at it as a quantum of time, right? If I'm meeting the person only for this 5 minutes, nothing adds on to it, right? So associated meaning of meeting this person leads to disproportionate response of how you deal with this person. Meeting the person can be simple. Hello, let's have a coffee, let's chat, let's have a good time. But the moment I associate, I'm going to have the rest of my life with you, all those associated meaning actually comes from trauma. So this is very interesting, right? So trauma is actually the fundamental belief systems that we have that we don't know that we have, that adds on all these layers. Like, so meeting a person for the date for the first time and the jitters and everything can come from your traumas to believe that the person is somebody you should depend on for the rest of your life, or the potential to be that person. So with that, you will add on a whole lot of other traumas onto that feeling, which creates these anxious feelings that we might get, like we think that, oh, that's a wonderful part of life. Yes and no. For every anxiety or excitement feeling that we have, there's also the crash. That if this person turns out bad, oh no, I wasted my time, and all these other feelings that's associated. These are all the results of the adding of meanings to that one particular experience that is about to happen in 5 minutes time just before you meet the person, right? Which, if out of the quantum of everything else, if you're just saying meeting a person, you shouldn't feel this anxiety. All these feelings that we regularly get about different things actually originates from trauma. And I say this as a person who experiences this all the time. About to go into a business meeting, oh gosh, this person's going to be a waste of my time. This person's going to hurt me. Next moment, actually, everything's perfectly fine. Right? There's all that kind of anticipation that I have in my system. That all came from traumas. Actually, what I realized for me, for example, in going to a business meeting, I had a trauma at the back of my childhood that believes that all business people are bad, because that's something that my parents kind of concluded when I was young. And because they had an offhand comment, and I agreed with it as a child, that, see, rich people are all bad. Business people become rich people, So it is the expression of frustration when I was a child. I took that conclusion and became real. And right now I'm running a business, which makes it even worse. So every time I go into a business meeting or I'm about to meet a business person, I still have sometimes these little bits of triggers where I believe that this is going to be a bad conversation and I'm going to have a struggle with this person. I've learned to live with it and manage it quite well. So I know how to manage it, but it has been a major part of my life because of the compound traumas that it created out of it. So I was anti-business. And then that's why I ended up being in business, because I started trying to face my fears and I went full on into business. So I was anti-incompetence, right? And then what happens is that I jumped into a field that I'm probably the most incompetent person within the year. Like I just jumped in this year, right? And it's a very technical field. If I'm anti-incompetence and I face on and feel it and still experience it and still be okay, that it was my goal also, right? That's how I deal with my traumas along the way. Actually, a lot of times it's about facing it, recognizing it. I had a major issue also, I can share with you guys, that that everybody else's methods is worse than mine. This is a genuine response I unconsciously have been having since I was young. So this belief came from the actually a bunch of interactions I had in childhood that made me conclude that my conclusions were better than other people's. And I stuck by it for a very, very long time. And it was underneath everything I was doing. Actually, that's actually one of the main reasons why I felt depressed in medical school, because I felt that they were doing everything wrong in psychiatry. I understand why they're doing it today. And if I have today's mindset, I might have been able to survive medical school, but I couldn't handle it when I was back in medical school, which is one of the reasons why I had all my struggles, right? If I accepted that medical world functions the way it did, because that's how the businesses work, that's how the economy developed, that's how all these kind of things happen, and I came from a more empathetic direction, I could have survived medical school. But I couldn't, because all my compound traumas were underneath, burning me from under all these different things that led to that feeling. So there was a very disproportionate response to the feeling of going to class, to the feeling of becoming a doctor, to the feeling of becoming a psychiatrist, to the feeling of dealing with the people. And that was a genuine response that I had. Disproportional, right? The baby having no milk for 5 seconds, ending up in a super humongous cry and ignoring the parent is a disproportionate response. But that is the feeling of life and death when we experience traumatic feelings. So that's a rather long rant to share a bit more about how it kind of works. And I'm using myself as an example because I've worked a lot on these things to face them, to figure out whether I can get past my traumas. And a lot of these come from very basic fundamental conclusions in childhood, where I have basically no understanding of the world, and I decided this is the truth. And it required a decision from the child. That doesn't mean the child is at fault because the child doesn't know, right? This is why, the reason why it's very important that we talk about it being a fixed conclusion that a child made is because that's how we learn to let go.
And the definition of a child you mentioned earlier is anything before 7 and younger, right?
Yeah, 7 and younger. So the definition of 7 and younger is in Piaget's rule of development of child development, right? It's actually because of the mental development before individuation. So in case anybody wants to learn more about this, Piaget's developmental milestones, right? Like I love to use his model to explain things. We had one whole session where I was talking about this previously, but what happens is that individuation or individualization, I mean, depending, I prefer the individuation to individuation, is the forming of your own personal identity. There's a reason why typically children at about 7 years old, actually this is the reason why primary school starts at 7, by the way. Because of the Piaget's model, therefore they segmented the schools according to that kind of developmental milestones. So individuation is where a child starts forming his or her own opinion or experience of the world. So I want to explain why I moved so far away from the original definition of trauma, because it's very important to recognize that everybody has a ton of traumas in us. When we use the word trauma, we say it as if it's such a severe thing. I don't experience traumas. I shouldn't be feeling like I'm experiencing traumas. Not true. All of us experience traumas to a certain degree, because as long as we lack an understanding of something and we make a conclusion, it is considered a trauma. It is considered a fixed belief that stops us and creates emotional, strong responses that create life or death-like feelings in us. Therefore, when we say that it is, it is an extreme experience, to the child it is, which is why it feels like life and death. If somebody just ignores you on WhatsApp, anybody here who got triggered over a blue tick, like getting blue ticked and then the person not replying, especially if you like the person, or you feel that the person is important to you, or like is your colleague, right? Like they blue tick you, what's wrong with you, right? That response is disproportional to the situation. Does this make sense? I would love to hear any opinions or any thoughts because I can't see any faces.
Chris, what do you think? Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's very, very true and logical.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe Ethan, I just want to ask some questions lah. So it's very interesting because I think it all came from childhood, right? But then if you see what's happening around, even at like workplaces, right? How different people react differently to different things. And some could be just like a new job, a new task given to them that it's quite uncertain and complex. Then they get very stressed out. And they get triggered lah. So then they get anxious. Then they start to jump the gun, become a bit more aggressive. So I wonder whether there's I suppose that trauma plays a role in that because then it shapes your behaviors in how you relate to adulthood as well. Then my question is, how do people generally find understanding with that?
Great. Okay, so let's start with this, right? That's why we always go back to anti-values. So the reason why I go back to anti-values is very simple. It is absolutely the first point of trigger. So this is why it's very important to find that. So we need to find out what the conclusion is. My favorite question to people once we talk about this is, what does this trigger or situation say about you as a person? So one of the major reasons is, so discovering your anti-values, right? Like remember that time we did the back four, you value this, but actually you're really triggered by that. The reason why people like certain things is because they want to be competent. Like anti-incompetence is because they want to be competent, right? Because they feel like if they are incompetent, then their parents don't love them. It goes back to this over and over again, right? It's always going back to, if I'm this, I will not be loved and I will not survive. If I'm not rich, my parents will not love me, therefore I won't survive. If I'm not smart, it means my parents will love me, it means I won't survive. That's a very common reason why people have anxiety. So when people are dealing with the gray area of something, right? If I do not, okay, so, and this is where power dynamics come back into the picture. It's a little bit longer story. Many people look at their bosses as their parents, which is why they get triggered if their parents behave a certain manner that's similar, if their bosses behave a similar way as their parents. So I've done this a number of times where people get really, really triggered by their bosses saying something that their parents have said before. While you see the reaction is humongous. The other part is that, like for example, Jeffers, where you hand a job that is ambiguous for them to try out. In their childhood, maybe their parents give them something ambiguous and they got scolded for doing it wrongly. Conclusion, ambiguous things equals do not do anything or just jump in, do it, run away. There are certain conclusions that we have made in childhood due to a response and an expectation of your response to them that leads them to having the anxiety and therefore leading to the mistakes. Versus going, Jeffers, what do you really want? I'm not understanding your ambiguous statement, for example. So it always goes back to, what does it say about me as a person? Because the conclusion of a child, this is where, if I am, then then my parents won't love me. And then it leads back to this. So all of us have this response, yeah.
So a big part of it also is parenting styles, right? So if a parent withhold affection when the kid does certain things, then that becomes part of that belief and that trauma for the kid. Right?
Yes. So if you notice, right, a lot of people, okay, so then people will ask me this question, but then I see siblings, how come they respond very differently? Because they learn from the other sibling. One of the interesting response that I've seen, right, is very often siblings are polar opposites of each other because one sees the other's failure and therefore goes the opposite direction.
Reminds me of the TikTok video I saw, right, whereby they like try to train a dog to do something or not do something, take a fake dog,
Yeah.
like pretend to eat,
whack,
and then
whack,
whack, right, and then suddenly all the dogs run, right? So
Yeah.
it's like not exactly sibling, but it's kind of role modeling the response, and then they react to that.
Yep. So there's a lot of those kind of responses in people's mindsets. So again, right, it always goes back to if I am something. So this is where we go back to the concept of identity. So anti-values is based off the concept of identity. So what are you most afraid of being?
Could it also be the flip side? Maybe because the word love me sounds like almost very negative, right? Would it be sometimes like, if I do this, my parents love me more? I mean, it sounds like the flip opposite, but the impact is a bit different, right?
So here comes the interesting part, right? No child really, okay, so this is my experience with children and whatever. They're not looking for more love from parents. They're looking for basic level love from parents. What I mean is attention. So a kid will drag a parent down to go, watch me do this, and then shit in front of them. Or like, that's what kids do, right? Like they want a parent to observe them, to just be there and witness them. That's actually all children need. They're not looking for extra attention and extra gifts unless they're already feeling deprived in the first place. So this is something that a lot of conclusions were made over a bunch of studies about parenting, right? Is that if parents are there, they don't have to pander to the kids. They have to explain to the kids why they are not doing this. So one of the things that I always find it very interesting is, it's a great point that you were talking about, right? Where are they looking for more love? If you notice a kid who is feeling free, like so French parenting, a kid is fully free to play in their pen and their parents get to do whatever they're doing. As long as the parents have their attention on the kid as and when needed, you see the kids are perfectly happy doing their stuff, managing themselves. They'll talk about the French parenting versus the Asian parenting. Like the Asian parenting is the child goes anywhere near something dangerous. Right, where suddenly there's over attention to them. And then the child starts feeling trapped. And then the child starts doing things to try to get rid of parents or certain things. So there is always a delicate balance between the two sides. This is actually what creates traumas. So if the parent overparents, the child concludes, if I am too independent, my parents won't love me, they will control me, they'll stop me from doing things, I will feel trapped, I will feel not being observed, not being allowed to be. Therefore, my extreme response is giving up. There are a lot of complex mechanisms in which at play very often because it's a daily interaction. We have easily 20 to 30,000 conclusions in our heads today to decide who we are today. 20 to 30,000 easily, right? What food we like, what we prefer to wear, how all these kind of different things. What kind do I need to look good or not? What is looking good? All these are made from conclusions from childhood, you know.
That's interesting, Ethan. So I wanted to ask, how do we find that delicate balance as a parent to a child?
Okay, so this is where we start talking about how does an adult let go so that we can deal with this on the children level.
Yeah.
Great. What is okay, so Jeffrey, let me ask you this question. As a person who's in coaching and NLP, what allows a person to let go of the traumas?
I mean, one thing is the understanding of the relationship has changed from young. So from NLP standpoint, usually we ask people to revisit the meaning that they give to themselves, because some of these are unconscious, right? So And it became a feeling already, just an adverse response. But when we ask people to revisit the meaning, sometimes they find that, oh, actually they were really young and they just don't have the resources to deal with it lah. But now looking from the lenses as an adult to relate to that same experience, they realize, oh, actually, they were more forgiving of themselves. And usually with that, then they start to open up. Oh, actually, some of the meaning has changed. And the way they see the situation then changes also. And then they suddenly don't have the disproportionate response as what Ethan might say lah, or get triggered as much. So that's one way from NLP lah.
Perfect. I mean, that's a great explanation, right? That's actually how all trauma healing works.
Yeah, I kind of just want to add on to what Jeffer said, right? So I'm going to draw on a very specific NLP process called timeline reimprinting. And I think that's what, Jeffer, you're thinking of when you talked about it, right? So
Yep.
there are a couple of things in the entire process, right? The first one is to identify the first time you experience this feeling, which I thought is interesting because you have put there first point of trigger, right? So in a timeline reimprinting, it's to go back to the first time you experienced that feeling, right? And then you then reassess the situation. And I think one of the interesting thing is it allows you to empathize with the person that's delivering that trauma. So it could be a caregiver, right? Maybe the caregiver was having a bad day that time or whatever, or the person didn't have the necessary resources at that point of time, right, to be able to give what you needed. And that creates the empathy. And what that does, I think, is it helps you to reframe the understanding or to create new understanding of that situation, right? So I think that many different things all pieced together in the entire process of this. I haven't even gotten to the letting go part, right? But that's the understanding piece. It helps you to understand from different perspectives of the first point of trigger.
So the key part of letting go is the empathy. So the key part of letting go. So I want everybody to share so from what we're talking about, what do you think empathy is? I want everybody to share what you think empathy is from our discussion point. If I can go to Zhining, what do you think empathy is, judging by what we just talked about?
Putting yourself in that individual's shoes, right, and trying to basically experience what they experience. Yeah, and
Perfect.
see if it would affect you in the same way. Yeah,
Great.
and if it does, then what? And to assess your own reaction, what would you have done? Would you have reacted in the same way? Yeah.
Great. I love that. I love that. What you just shared. What about Corinne? What do you think?
I think it is to put yourself into someone else's shoes, to try to understand why they react the way they did, to gain understanding.
Cool. Great. Yura?
Yeah, both have said it very, very well. I think it's also to be able to accept it.
Yes. Accepting that the other person comes from the other point of view, right?
Yeah.
Cool. What about Chris? I mean, feel free to rehash what they say. I'm not asking you to add on. Yeah. Chris?
Yes.
Yeah. So what is empathy? Yeah.
What is empathy?
Yes.
Wow. Empathy. What is empathy? I think empathy is about seeing from the other point of view and really feeling it ourselves as well, which is something that takes a lot of awareness that the whole world is not just
my perspective.
Does not revolve all around us. And I think that takes understanding and practice, as well as a certain character would find it easier than others. So, but I would say that empathy and love is really some of the characteristics that we humans should improve on over time.
Great. Thank you. Great. Okay, so I just want to share, right? Empathy. Okay, so if you look at the difference between a 2-year-old child or a 1-year-old child with no capacity to understand another point of view. So we talk about this as a child believes all their facts in their heads is universal. That means if I believe that all feces look yellow, my conclusion is everybody sees feces as yellow. That's what a child does. So if you notice, right, below 7 years old, most kids believe that their opinions are king because that's all they can perceive. The reason why I use the age up to 7 is because anything beyond that is actually an extension of their inability to take on other people's perspectives. Kids are unable to have empathy. So they're not evil. They are they're not able to. They're not able to actually have empathy. Most kids mirror their parents' empathy. The actual ability to appreciate what the other person feels is not real. It is a mirrored empathy created by following and mimicking their parents. So if a kid looks really empathetic in childhood, it might be because they are following their parents' footsteps. Because the actual ability, which we all talked about beautifully, is the ability to see the other person's perspective. But I'll add on the next layer, the integration of the other person's perspective into my perspective. That means I'm taking, okay, right now my attempt is to take all your perspectives and put it into mine and try to explain how all of them differ, how all of them work. I might state my ground, and this is where I'm from. But I can recognize why you think your way. I can recognize why he thinks his way. That's true empathy. Most people who are too savior mindset and try to think that everybody else's opinion is better than theirs, and they lose their own opinion, that's not called empathy, right? That is actually just sympathy, right? As the definition of the word goes. So the ability to let go of traumas begins with empathy. Can you have empathy for the person who caused you to feel this way? Very often, why we have a life or death reaction to somebody or anxiety or all these kind of strong feelings towards a situation is because we're not able to see the other person's perspective. In fact, in my mind, the reason why meeting new people is so stressful is because I cannot see the other person's perspective because I have not met the person. I can only fathom and imagine and whatever. But once I understand how a person behaves, it's a lot safer for me. Versus, Alex, you were just talking about some particular people that you know exactly how he's going to behave, but you don't have empathy for him because you're not able to integrate the person's perspective into your picture. You're muted.
Actually, I thought it's interesting, right? It's possible to empathize and still disagree, right? I mean, like, I kind of understand where you come from. Doesn't mean I need to like it or be happy with it, right? It's like, that's the difference.
Yes. So we have a lot of grounds where we disagree in terms of how we look at things, Alex, you and me. But we understand where we're coming from and we can trust each other to not be stupid about arguing about it, right? So, or like we have a lot of agreements, but there's a lot of nuanced differences, right? There are preferences that you have, there are preferences that I have.
And I think that brings in a different element, right? So there's an element of empathy, right? Which is I kind of understand where you're coming from. There's an element of the ability to disagree. But in the space of the element of being able to disagree, there's an element of trust, right? So I can empathize, I know where you're coming from, I put myself in your shoes, but I don't trust you.
Okay, I can trust you to behave badly. So here comes the flip side of the word trust. I can trust you to always screw things up. Not you, but rather they say I don't trust this person, is I will trust him to always screw up. So this is literally my approach to most people. I trust them to screw up on these grounds and these grounds, but I trust them to do this well. So then I will not ask them for help in these areas, but I'll ask them for help for these areas. But when people talk about the word trust, they're like trusting completely and wholly, almost like they're the savior.
So I think there are two types of trust that we talk about. Sorry, we kind of deviate a bit, right?
Yeah.
There are two types of trust, and also something that Patrick Lencioni alludes to in his 5 Dysfunctions of
I love it.
Team.
Yes.
Two types of trust. One is predictive trust, which is I know how the person would behave, right? That's the predictive trust. Mm-hmm. Then there's the vulnerability-based trust, which is I feel safe to disagree with you. I feel safe to air my opinions that's different from you. So this, I feel safe to look stupid in front of you.
I feel
Right.
safe to show you my personal interests and my agenda so that we can be aligned, for example.
Yeah, right. And that requires vulnerability-based trust, right? Because there's vulnerability involved. So the one that you say, I trust you to screw things up, right? That's a predictive-based trust of behavioral. I'm talking about like the vulnerability-based trust.
But that's the best part. I don't give the vulnerability-based trust. Okay, so this is another part of it. I am vulnerable. I mean, I share my own stories. I share how I work, how my mind works with everybody in this session. Is it because I trust you guys? I'm on Facebook live stream. So that's the interesting part about the vulnerability-based trust. Most of the vulnerability-based trust is on the predictive element of that I can see that you can help me if I were to be honest with you and vulnerable with you. When Patrick Lencioni talks about it, because it's in the context of work, it becomes very useful. But the truth is, I still can predict that you will treat me fairly, right? And without judgment, if I were to be honest with you and vulnerable with you.
Right. So if you trust the person to be unfair towards you, then you don't have that vulnerability-based trust, right?
Yes.
So there's still the trust element that we're talking about. That there needs to be a positive slant towards the predictive trust, therefore allowing us to have the vulnerability-based trust, which is the other factor.
Absolutely. So most people use the word trust as vulnerability-based trust. I use it as predictive-based trust. Why? Because that's within my control. So when I talk about this, it's always about creating more locus of control within myself, such that, for example, if I know your perspective, so for example, as a child, I wouldn't know why my mom left me, probably because she had to go to the toilet for 5 minutes when I needed to run to the toilet, when I was crying out and I needed milk, right? So I might not know why she left me, right? So as an adult today, I can change the experience using empathy, and like she held her pee in for the whole day. She needed to go there for the 5 seconds because I took all her attention for the day. And therefore, my experience of her not loving me was based on a very single, one-sided belief system as a baby that did not have the capacity to understand why she left me. But my conclusion as a child is I'm unloved. I will never be loved because So that's how traumas work.
So Ethan, I want to cycle back to the vulnerability and predictive-based trust, right? I mean, just to help my understanding. So I just want to put into a scenario. So because you said that, because you have a certain level of basis whereby people will be fair to you and you just share whatever you share now, right, with us. So I wonder whether if somebody who doesn't have that but still take a leap of faith to just share vulnerability. So where does that land? Is it still predictive based or?
So this is where my favorite part about this. Okay, so when I'm sharing this on Facebook, what's the chances that somebody who reads this or watches this goes like, hey, Isa, why are you like that one? Right? Like there is a good chance that there is that public opinion that is like, you are problematic, right? Which then comes the part, can I manage myself if the worst scenario was to come? That's also a part of the trust factor whenever we deal with people. So I always go back to this, right? Whenever we talk about traumas and everything, the reason why we use the vulnerability-based trust is because part of us are looking for people to not judge us. And we have this hope that by sharing vulnerably, these people would still accept us as we are and still whatever. The list goes on in terms of the wonderful things that they want to hope as response. If you notice the YouTube stars, right? Like I've been watching a lot of the YouTube recently because I got YouTube Premium. And they talk a lot about being vulnerable online. They got tons of vitriol. They got tons of people making fun of them. Why do they still be vulnerable online? Do they trust that humanity will be right to them? Do they trust? What do they trust? How do they trust?
Actually, it's interesting because as a tactic, right, it humanizes them, right? And when you humanizes a person, it helps to make other people, it makes it easier for other people to trust you, right? So I think whenever we talk about leadership or we talk about working, the humanizing part of yourself, being vulnerable, is what helps you to allow other people to trust you.
But in the same breath, a lot of people who are online will still attack you.
So it's interesting, right? So I don't know whether then do people still continue with that, because there's still a large majority. That means there's always a mixed population. Some people will empathize with you, and then there's also another group who will, a keyboard warrior, right, will flame you from behind.
Yes.
So I don't know whether it's a bit of like a benefit versus cost kind of thing, where actually majority do understand where I'm coming from, and I sort of feel accepted in that sense.
So if you hear the stories of these people who are vulnerable online, right? Very often they're saying, when I was younger, somebody was vulnerable online, and therefore I want to do this to pay it forward. So there's a very selfish, I'll use the word selfish, but it's a very human, altruistic yet selfish agenda of paying it forward. It fits my identity as a person. It allows me to show empathy to other people and let them put themselves in my perspective. So the people who can integrate my perspective, take it on. The people who cannot, too bad, is your problem, right? I do it for those people who can, not the people who can't. So then, do I trust the internet? Do I trust the people out there? No, I don't. I trust my response to it.
You remind me of this quote I saw recently online, right? That a bird is able to rest its weight on the branches, not because it trusts in the strength of the branches, but it trusts in the ability of its own wings. So a little bit like that, right? It's not so much of how other people respond, but whether you have the internal capacity, resources to deal with things as they come along.
Absolutely. And one of the biggest realizations I had, because I'm trying to deal with a bunch of people nowadays, especially with my cybersecurity school and everything, right? People from all walks of life talk to us. One of the most important parts about dealing with my own traumas is, when I'm reading the message from the person and they say something really, really triggery, my first response is, how can I understand from this person's point of view? Now, in the early days, right, where I used to hate sales, hate marketing, hate business, right? I used to go, these idiots, right? Like there will be that response. It is a lot I can let go of my traumas because I put myself in the situations where I trigger it. I go through it, I change the perspective, I understand the other person's point of view as the first focus, and from there find a sense of letting go. And that's exactly where it comes from. Empathy is the first step. I saw Corinne did try unmute. Sorry if I interrupted you.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
So yeah, okay. You want to share anything?
No, I guess it's also because people are authentic, and if you're authentic, people can tell, and maybe that's why they put themselves out there. And the thing about YouTube is it's really all about making money to some extent. So I'm not quite sure how authentic an influencer is in that sense, just from that point of view.
Great question. I mean, there are people who are very authentic on YouTube. I mean, when we talk about this, they even show you the back of their house, their stories, all the different things they have experienced and things like that. They have less viewership than the super popular ones. The super popular ones that go around pranking people, joking around, great on them. They have thousands of followers. But there are also those who have, just gone, like, this is what I really like, this is what I don't like. And they do amp up certain parts, but authenticity is a large part of how they build their following. But even when they're vulnerable to the audience, which is a hard part, right? Like saying, look, I've gotten to this point, I've done this is what I've done. I made a mistake about this. I'm sorry, guys. The genuine conversations they have with their community about what they've gone through is still something that is really important, in my opinion. But when we talk about trust, right? That's exactly it, right? Do they trust the audience or do they trust themselves to manage what comes along? And that's also part of the word empathy. If I cannot understand your point of view, I can't trust myself to handle you. And this also goes back to this whole part where we need to take on the other person's perspective of the people who trigger us. So there's this person that used to trigger me like nobody's business. It took me 2 years to get past dealing with him. 2 years, right? This guy likes marketing to no end. He told me this one statement. The best people say everything in one sentence. The smartest people summarize everything in one sentence. I was like, the hell, right? Like, you don't need to say a lot of words. You just need one sentence to explain everything complex. I'm like, no, like, there's so many things out there that we need a lot of complex explanations. I spend all this time trying to explain all these different parts to everybody, use a lot of words to do it because there needs to be parts and parts and parts and parts. But this guy says that, and he brushes everything else aside. So there's this ignorance in him that bugged me to no end. But here comes the interesting part. That's because I didn't want to take his point of view. His point of view wasn't wrong. His point of view was just limited to his perspective. But his perspective was very important for me to learn about marketing, which is very interesting. Marketing is not marketing. Marketing is making things easy and accessible to people who otherwise won't, by definition, right? It doesn't mean it is bad or good or, whatever. It's just turning something simple for other people to understand so they can know where to look for a solution or what to understand. That is marketing entirely. Like, that's the whole basis behind marketing. So my inability to understand his point of view limited my ability to get past my own traumas, to run businesses properly, to manage people properly, to do things that matter for my businesses. And that's why empathy helped a lot. The day that I was meeting this person, he said the same damn thing to me. And I just laughed and went, okay, I'm no longer triggered. I'm happy, right? In my mind, I was just going, great. I've let go of the need to go anti-ignorance or anti-fancy.
So here's the interesting thing, right? We've covered like what's trauma, where did it come from, simple trauma, complex trauma, and things like that. And when we explored empathy as a first step to understanding. But the leap between understanding to letting go it's not always intuitive, right? Just because you understand doesn't necessarily mean that you can let go, right? So how do you make that leap?
So that letting go process, this is great. Let's leap there.
Ooh. I'm just seeing
Jeffers, wonderful stuff. Yeah, thank you very much, Jeffers. Great job. This is where letting go happens. This is why So the first step of letting go is becoming the thing you hate the most. So when I say this, I don't mean become the thing that you hate the most and do those actions. It's and being I'll use the word imagining yourself as the very thing you hate the most and seeing how you can appreciate that person. This is very much one of the major steps that I had to take.
Isn't that empathy?
Yeah, but empathy for the other person first, right? Then me. Because I don't identify with that person, that doesn't mean that I can see myself as the person. The reason why the trauma is there is because I am this. If I am this, I will not be loved. I can understand that that person can be like this, but I will never be that person, okay? I will never be that person. That's how a lot of people take on the empathy angle.
Right. Okay.
Does this make sense? Like anybody with struggles? There's a difference between thinking that I understand what the person is like versus me seeing myself as the person that I hate.
Okay. Makes sense. Because there are certainly people that I can imagine and understand why they behave in a certain way, but I cannot imagine myself behaving in that same way.
Yeah. So if you notice how you breathe hard when you think of yourself being that person. Yeah, that's a trauma. So that's an anti-value trauma cycle within that space. The reason being, we sometimes will be that person in our minds to ourselves. I'm pretty sure everybody has thought of being the person that they don't want to be. For a moment, for a split second, for whatever. We've always had those little moments where, like, if you're a person who doesn't believe in making like who's not been a huge fan of people who scam people for money, right? But then sometimes you wish you were that person because you're so much easier to make money through that means. Then you will have that thought go through your head, and if you dismiss it and you say you cannot think of it that way, you will never be able to fully let go of your own issues. That oversimplifier guy. So the key part here is anti-ignorant, meaning the person wants to be ignorant. The key part here is, when do I want to be ignorant as a person? There are plenty of moments where I realize that I'm freaking ignorant, but I don't know about it. And the more I cannot stand people who are ignorant, the more I was holding on to I'm not ignorant. Until I can forgive myself for being ignorant, I cannot forgive people who are being ignorant. So this is where, can I understand when I'm ignorant? Am I ignorant of people's emotions? Am I ignorant of people's knowledge? Am I ignorant of things that I don't care about? Am I ignorant? Why would I choose to be ignorant? That exercise of ignorance got me to really understand, oh, so that's why I can't stand that guy. Because I used to hate the feeling of being ignorant or the dumbest person in the room or this kind of stuff. And then I started accepting that myself. I have been ignorant. I just didn't recognize it. Can I be okay with being the ignorant person?
It's a very interesting point. I remember reading somewhere before, or at least hearing about it, that the thing we dislike most about other people is what we see in them that we dislike about ourselves.
Also known as the shadow self.
Yeah.
Tie in all the way back, right? So
Yeah.
letting go is the process of loving your shadow self. That's another long discussion we can have. But until you can see yourself as the ignorant person as well, you know, as the person who really, like, if you can't stand that kind of person, like a financially imprudent person who's a spendthrift, right? Like Alex, I'm pretty sure you met some people that, like, the way they spend money, you go like, oh God, I cannot be that person. Have you had experience, or like, want to give me an example?
Yeah, I'll love to be their friend so they can spend on me.
That's true.
Yeah.
But you can never see yourself as that person, right?
Yeah.
How much do you spend on your godson?
A lot.
So I like to use these examples because we become the very person that we don't want to be. That's what anti-values does. We are blind. See, you will never identify as a person who splurges on things, but you splurge on your godson.
Oh, actually, I do know. I identify with people who can splurge on people they care about, or causes that are important to themselves. So, but I get a point, right? So a big part of letting go is to be able to, I guess, I'm jumping the gun, accept that same quality in yourself in the first place before you can start to let go of that quality in other people. Right, so that's what I'm hearing, and like you say, it ties back to the shadow self.
So this is very much the part about acceptance and letting go. So when we talk about empathy, right? Empathy seems very easy when it's external. That person is like this, therefore they think like this. But I will never be that person, you know?
And so, if I were to add on to what you just typed, right, it's actually accept the same quality that you cannot stand in yourself, right?
Yes. Okay, let me just go there. Because we're all humans and we all will have days where we're exactly the person that we hate.
Yeah.
Moments, days, split seconds that we will be exactly the person we hate. So, like, for example, the people who hate people who talk too loudly. There'll be moments where you talk too loudly. A person who cannot stand people who talk too softly. There will be moments where you talk too softly, right? There will be those days where you will be that person that you hate the most.
Mm.
And the moment you can accept that about yourself is the first day you let go of that trauma. Because that trauma is a conclusion. Let me go back to this word. If I am blank, my parents won't love me, and therefore I will have death. That's the feeling that... So actually, just so you guys know, right? Suicidality is very much linked to this feeling. if I have an overwhelming identification with something that I hate about myself, and that has been my identity for a very long time, it has been a very big driver for a number of people who have that feeling. I know this because I experienced it myself. When I felt suicidal, very specifically, I became the person I hated the most. And because I felt that I was not going to be lovable, I might as well leave this world. That's a real feeling for me. Because if I have this conclusion that I will never be loved if I'm this person, and at that moment I concluded that I'm that person, why should I live? That was a very major thought process for me. On hindsight, I managed to learn this much later on. But I remember the feelings of that feeling, the triggers that led to the point and everything. Mind you, I had my best days on those days. And it's those best days that caused me to spiral into suicidality because I had a feeling of good, then a thought that I became the very person I cannot stand. And that crash was what led me down to the feeling and the spiral into that space. And the reason why I can share all this with you guys is because I spent a lot of time really looking into my own journey. Doesn't mean it applies for everybody, for you necessarily today, but this is a process that I've noticed for most people, most of the studies that I've done, most of the things that I've worked on. It always goes back to an identity that we have about ourselves that we're trying to avoid. Anybody here who is scared of being dependent?
Me.
Great. What is the feeling when you feel like you're a dependent person?
A dependent person?
Yeah, like that you feel like I need to ask for help.
Useless.
Okay, great. That feeling of uselessness almost feels like you don't deserve to live. Almost, right?
Not that I don't deserve to live, but I think it's more of life is not worth living if it's at that extent.
Great. So that feeling, okay, thank you for sharing. Thank you for the vulnerability. I want to just address that space, right? Like that feeling of dependency could come from a feeling of when you first once depended on your parents. Then this exact situation can create a conclusion in a baby that I cannot depend on my family and therefore I cannot be dependent and therefore da 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 da. So there are people with that conclusion that I've helped regress the memory for, go back to memories, who have made a conclusion over food that parents took away from them. And therefore, I should never depend on my parents. Therefore, I will not be dependent anymore. And therefore, if I'm dependent, I will lead to death. That's a conclusion in their heads. I'm not saying that's necessary for you, but the feeling and the entertainment of whether you are a dependent person. So meaning, can I allow myself to depend on other people? Not necessarily becoming a dependent person, but can I allow myself to depend on other people so I can be stronger? Is a very much next step for you to become the ability, having the ability to let go of this anti-dependence.
Because if you are anti-dependence, then you might end up with trying to do everything yourself all the time, right?
I think there are different kinds of dependence. Like for work and for certain things, I'm okay to ask for help, and I'm okay to let people do things on my behalf. But I think the kind of dependence that I that I fear, the most is more of not being able to do activities of daily living myself.
ADLs.
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
It's weird that we're talking about this because it has been a very traumatic week.
Oh.
Yeah, I had a very traumatic doctor's experience last Tuesday, which led to me crying for a couple of days, which if I cry, is something really not funny.
Deep.
Yeah. So I've been thinking a lot about that and some other stuff as you've been talking. Yeah, but the thing is that, okay, so essentially I got a diagnosis of hand arthritis. Yeah, which to me is more of a death sentence than cancer.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, because cancer you can die, but then if you with this who dies directly from arthritis? you just have to suffer in pain, and you can't. I haven't been able to go for yoga classes. I'm told to stop yoga for the rest of my life. Yeah, and essentially there are lots of things I won't be able to do. Yeah, and things that I still don't have answers apart from this thing, which I don't believe is the root issue that I have. Yeah, so yeah, so I guess there are different kinds of dependence that we're talking about here. Yeah,
I don't know. I love what you shared. That's a very good perspective you shared. Thank you for this, and thank you for sharing with us your experience. I think it really, like, it's almost like, for me, right? If imagining one day I'm not able to speak, for me, right? Like, for all of you guys, you'll be like, oh no, like yeah, no. At the same time, it's like the maybe there's a good thing. Nah, kidding. But I think one of the major parts about this is that it sounds terrifying. I mean, it sounds absolutely terrible. Like for you to experience something like this. In the same breath, right? Even this includes me, right? Even if I were to lose my voice completely, I will not be able to speak for the rest of my life. There's still a lot of faculties I can use. And even if I'm in pain all my life, you know, there are those people who have like paraplegic, all these kind of different things with those stories. I'm not trying to compare you to them, but how do they overcome it? Why is it that they can still have very full, happy lives in spite of it? Because you again, right? You akin it to worse than a cancer diagnosis, which is very interesting, because to a perspective of an outsider, the complete outsider, it will be, but you get to live what? But they don't understand your perspective, right? Which is the value of your hands.
Yeah.
Is a very large part of your identity as a person, because you're able to do things on your own. ADL, right? We go back to this. The ability to take care of yourself, not being dependent on other people to do basic activities of daily living. Great. So this is where the when we talk about letting go of traumas, I mean, I think this is a very interesting point, because I mean, there's so many thoughts that I have about arthritis that is also one of the reasons why I left medicine personally. But that's a different story altogether. It's because arthritis is a lot more complex than what we believe it is. I don't know about your situation, but you know, I hope that there's a good resolution for this. But when we talk about this, there's so many options as to how to recover and do better and not have to suffer in terms of ADL, even with the arthritis, ideally.
Sorry, what's ADL?
Activities of daily living, like even buttoning your t-shirt, like getting out of your bed, those are ADLs.
Being able to go to the toilet on your own, be able to feed yourself. Yeah.
Great. So yeah, but see, that ideally, as an outsider, objective point of view doesn't mean your experience is wrong. As an objective outsider, the first thing that goes through a person's mind would be, but you can do so many other things. Why are you so worried? Right? Like if I were to go the negative road, as an empathetic person, you'll be like, okay, that sounds really terrible. What can we do to support you? Right? Through this journey, all this kind of stuff. But in the same breath, that feeling that you have that life is not as valuable because you are not able to use your hands the way that you want to is still a disproportionate response to the actual situation. Would that be the case?
I don't know. I'm thinking about that.
Okay, great. So yeah, so I'm just saying this on a very, very like there's still options, there's still opportunities, there's still hope. But the feeling that you experience is as if it's gone in the way that you've talked about it.
Yeah, that I agree. Yes.
So that loss of hope, the loss of everything, and that frustration is the disproportionate response. And that's why it is important to resolve it in that space. Because the disproportionate response is stopping you from still coming out of this in a positive light, no matter what the outcome is. Because okay, so we've had you in the previous session. You sound like a great person who can do amazing things and support a lot of people. The last thing I want you to do is to feel like your life is worthless because of this. I'm saying this on a personal conversation level of knowing you as what you do and the kind of concern you have for people. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a bit of context to that is also that, I mean, I had plans to, well, apart from yoga being a way of me managing my well-being, yeah, it's a very positive thing for me. I was actually planning to go on to take on yoga teacher training. Yeah, and I was planning to eventually kind of specialize in to yoga therapy.
Okay, so as a
Yeah,
career
yeah,
route that
people
has
like
really
me.
affected you.
Yeah, so it was quite a devastating thing. I think it was also the way that I was not heard at the consultation. Yeah, and the way that my concerns were just not addressed, and I was just told to go get a custom-made splint done when it's painful, and yeah, that's it lah. Yeah, I mean I'm not yeah, the couple of days were traumatic really badly. It's not that I haven't emerged from it. I don't know. I'm hoping to get answers tomorrow because I've got a couple of other consults lined up.
Great.
Yeah.
I hope you meet a
think-
very nice, empathetic doctor that can actually give you proper solutions rather than brush you aside and tell you just get it.
Yeah, the doctor you have sounds terrible. It sounds like it's just okay. This is routine, right? Just do this and get it done. It's almost like he isn't listening.
Yeah,
to
yeah. So I'm trying. When Ethan was talking, I was trying to really. I've been trying to tell myself that okay, maybe she's having a bad day, like or she was pregnant, maybe she isn't feeling well and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think there is a big gap towards that empathy and understanding part and acceptance. Yeah, that is the gap that people can't always cross, or even I myself, I cannot always cross. Yeah.
Yes. And one of the major parts about this is if we can't get past ourselves, we cannot get past to other people, right? Like if I'm in my own thoughts, so like if today, tomorrow you go to work and you feel so devastated you can't focus on work and you make a mistake and somebody yells at you and you yell right back, which might not be within your character, like from what I'm hearing. That person might feel like, what's wrong with her, right? And that thing cycles across. But at the end of the day, right? So that's why I always go back to this, where I work very much on working on my traumas and my belief systems and my issues so that I do not let a bad experience carry through me to the next person. I think that's a personal belief system that I have. Not that your experience is, not bad. Like it's terrible. I hear you. One of my first few thoughts is that actually yoga by right should be able to help you with your hands. My thoughts about this, because Ayurvedic medicine and all this kind of stuff are an interest of mine. I've learned a bit about it. A lot of arthritic things relate back closer to Asian level of medicine, because Western medicine can't treat orthopedic things regarding arthritis very well, versus like a more holistic therapy approach. I'm not sure, but like this is where I come in with like, oh man, there's so many solutions they can go for. But I think more importantly is like in this conversation line, right? Like if we look at how this, like because of the meaning of your hands and being able to do yoga, imagine if the doctor says, yes, you're having arthritis in your hand and you can still continue yoga, but be careful about what happens to your hand. Please do not do handstands. Please do not do this. Please do mostly moves that do not include the hands until we can find a way to better manage your hands. How would it have felt for you?
Well, definitely better to have options, but I think I still need more exact details from her. But that's perhaps just me. That's my preference. Yeah.
Great. No, but that's great. See, do you notice how there is a huge change just by the way that a person can approach you? And therefore, like the same situation, hand arthritis, very different emotional response internally.
I did get that eventually from the occupational therapist that was supposed to make the splint for me, which I rejected.
Okay.
But the thing is that while it made me feel better in the moment, it made me feel, I didn't feel good the next day because she did not follow up with something that she actually said that she would do.
Okay. So I noticed multiple triggers in the line of things that you experienced in these few days. I would love to take this offline with you as a personal thing, because I don't think airing this out completely online is an ideal thing either. But I appreciate you sharing this. I would love to help you like understand a bit more about like the situation, like see what can be done, especially about the hand. But like that would take precedence over dealing with the traumas of it. because it's usually when I deal with traumas, it's after the things happen, because what happens is you do an after action review, not as a part of the process that you're going through, because it's real for you right now. It's very, very severe for you right now. And that's what it is. But yeah. I'd like to thank you for sharing. We'll probably try to exchange contact somehow later on, but happy to have a conversation with you about this later on. But I think we need to wrap up, and I hope that, thank you very much for sharing this. It really helped shed a bit more light about the context of how to understand to get past this. So ideally, let me just explain a bit more, right? Like if and when your hand is properly managed and having a better outcome, ideally, I will go back into the triggers that triggered you and accepted all the different parts of you: the dependent person, the person, the inefficiency of the person who didn't live up to their promise. All these kind of different parts are things that I will work on, that you need to accept in yourself to lose the triggers in your experience. Because just now when you say that she failed to live up to one part, I have to say that it sounds like anti-failure of promise, which I know you have also. So these are the parts I will go through with you if I was to help you let go of your traumas, in order for you to have a better experience the next time with anything else, but not necessarily a hand, but anything else that you experience of dealing with people in this manner. That's how the process works. It's a lot like past integration. Perfect. All the different therapy methods all lead back to the same point, where you're all talking about trauma healing and helping people feel as good as possible, no matter how bad situations are. And that's the goal.
Yeah.
And
so a couple of things, right? So Ethan, if you're open, what I can do is you can message me on meetup.com, because there's the system, right? And then I can link you up with Ethan through WhatsApp or something.
Yep. And
then we can kind of connect both of you, and you can continue the conversation on a more in-depth manner, right? So I think it's 9:30, so let's take it down for a landing. A couple of things. We've covered quite a lot of ground today, right? So we started off with the context of how do we get here, right? From anti-values conversation of our past 2 sessions. We started talking about what is trauma for us. Or does Jeffers want to take us through, since you did the
Yeah, Jeffers, you're the one who did describing, so yeah, I would love for you to take us for the landing.
Okay, sure. Do you want me to share screen or?
Yeah, you share screen.
I share screen now. Okay. Can you see my screen? Let me know.
Yep.
Okay. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Perfect.
Great. Yeah. So I guess we started talking around. I mean, what do you know about trauma? Different people have different definition of trauma, but eventually, we all come to things like, oh, it's like an extreme experience of single events that are emotionally charged, that leave a deep imprint that is subconscious, and in relation to some negative experience. And then later on, we talk quite a fair bit around different definitions of trauma, and in relation to that, is usually quite innocuous. Some examples were given, like parents not paying attention to a crying baby, a dog who's very sad when scolded by an owner, but essentially it gives you a very intense feeling of like it's life and death. We talk a lot about a child, because I think we also look into when a child is below 7 years old, that's the before individuation stage. Most kids has the inability to take on people's perspective. So some of the key conclusions, like if trauma is really around a child's conclusion of a situation that they not understand, and it's a conclusion made about the relationship with the caregiver that decides that make them feel like it's a life and death situation. There are also other ways that we look at trauma, which we then explore their fundamental belief system that we don't know that we have. We have some examples between French versus Asian parenting, and where is the delicate balance between both, because either extreme end may not be well. And one of the key things that came about was actually talking about the associated meaning that leads to disproportionate response. That is a telltale sign that, oh, that is a trauma area that has not been resolved yet. A couple of examples, we talk about trauma in adulthood and compound trauma. I like what Ethan said, anti-values upon anti-values upon anti-values. It's like triggers on triggers and triggers. which is triggered by other traumas, which are compound layers of memories. Some examples are like I would see like some of these statements that are a bit more generalized. Giving food equals love. Rich people are all bad. My conclusions are better than others, which Ethan shared with his own personal example. We started to talk a bit about anti-values, it's the first point of trigger, and essentially it addresses this question like, what does this trigger say about you as a person, right? Some examples like anti-competence is because you want to be competent, right? Then there's also a point where Ethan mentioned like, oh, many people look at their bosses like their parents, triggered, especially if their bosses mimic their parents, and that's quite common to be seen in the society or how we interacted. Then lastly, we talk a lot about how do we resolve trauma. Two things we talk about. One is changing or reframing your understanding about the situation and the people who are involved. And then later on, we talk a lot about letting go, and letting go starts with empathy, right? And really, a couple of points that came around is like, if you have an inability to understand other people's point of view, it actually limits you in getting past your own personal traumas. So one of the thing that Ethan said that was pretty useful would be to facilitate this process of letting go is imagine yourself as the person you hate the most and being able to appreciate it. Essentially, letting go is also around coming to your own acceptance, loving your shadow self, accept that same quality that you cannot stand in yourself. And one quote by Ethan's like, if you cannot even get past yourself, you can't really get to others. Right, so a great example shared by some of you, which really relate to this is, I mean, even though like the dependence was one of the example used, but the feeling itself is like really links back to what Ethan mentioned around the associate meaning that gives a disproportionate response, right? We also talked a bit separately around trust, predictive-based trust, and vulnerability-based trust. And I think we don't have time to unpack, but it's a good question. I heard it from Ethan saying as a pattern is that, do you actually trust in your own capacity to handle it when the worst thing happens? Or do you trust in others, right? So I think there will be a relationship shift when you essentially let go and come to some acceptance, right? So with that, I think that's a brief summary of what we have covered. So back to Alex.
Thanks, Jeffers. So as a way to close, one of the things we do is we go around to have everybody share what their biggest takeaway is. So we'll do that, and then we will close the session. So let's go in. I was thinking we could go in the opposite direction now, right? So maybe Corinne, could you share a little bit about what your biggest takeaway from today's is?
It seems that we can't get past, or we can't get to letting go unless we revisit or relive that trauma in order to empathize. And then we get to the letting go.
It'd be quite scary to do so as well, right? So the willingness to do that becomes very important.
That's why usually we use guides and friends, but yeah, Corinne?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so that seems to be what I've been reading up about the last few days, about reliving that trauma in order to empathize, and then to let go.
Thanks, Corinne. Tse-Ning, what about you? Your biggest takeaway?
I frankly am not sure. I think I need to go listen to this entire thing all over again. Yeah, to try to digest everything. But I think it's the part about really empathy and trying to and it being the key part of letting go at the very first step. I don't know, because I do handle a lot of people at work that I can tell come with this kind of trauma, like they have backgrounds that they are not proud of. Yeah, so I can actually kind of see a lot of what's happening, what Ethan actually mentioned, that actually is happening with them, and you know how it manifests in their behaviors and stuff. Yeah, I think at this point in time, I still don't have an answer as to how I can help them or how I can help them to move on. I think that's the part that I would be interested in. Yeah, but yeah, I think the part with the empathy as the key part of letting go, I think that would be the key point. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Tse-Ning. I think focus of today's session was more of how do we help ourselves to accept and let go,
Yes.
right? So for the next session, we can do how can we help other people to accept and let go.
I just want to take note, the only way to help other people is ourselves being experts in helping ourselves.
Okay. So that's the first step to be able to do it.
Because relatability is a very large part of the ability to help other people. If I've gone through it myself, I've already gone through the stuff, I've experienced this and I do this on a regular level, like I'm still sorting out my own stuff on a daily level. That's the only way I can help other people because I'm still living it.
But I think at the same time, you will always have a trauma that you are sorting out. Yeah.
Yes. So that's why it's like once I'm on the journey of doing this, it's a lot easier for me to help other people because I have experienced something similar or I have a relatable point to help this person.
Thank you.
Thanks, Celine. Chris, what's your biggest takeaway from today?
I think my biggest takeaway from today is that trauma is really more common than we think. And I think there's a really, really high probability that everyone experiences it at one point or another in their life. And again, I think it's about the understanding of trauma and also of ourselves. Then we can handle it better. Because it's a case of not what happens to us, right? But it's how we respond to it, and that creates the good outcome that we would want instead of reacting to it. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Chris. So back to me. My biggest takeaway was making the leap from empathizing, which is being able to put myself in the other person's shoe, to identifying with it. So being able to see that quality in myself and accepting it. So that part, when I had the conversation with Ethan, I thought that was quite enlightening for me, right? The seeing it myself and accepting that part of myself first. Empathy part I could do. The seeing it myself and accepting it is kind of my next level of development. And Yura, your turn.
Sorry. Hi. Honestly, it was about the parenting part when Ethan was sharing about the Asian versus France parenting. I was like, oh my god! I literally like, be careful lah. Oh my goodness. So thank you. It's a good wake up call and a good reminder because you know it, but I'm just so overprotective, right? So now that I have two, I have to scale down a bit. Another biggest takeaway, thank you very much, because I always know that, I mean, I don't really know the details of the trauma. I think it's a good revelation because it's really something that has happened. So it could be bad, it could be good too. I think it's an interesting situation that you have experienced and it kind of affect and could have shaped you. So thank you very much for that. And my last one is Japheth. Japheth, I don't know whether I pronounced your name correctly. I love your summary. It was very nice. Thank you. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Yura. Okay, so I think that's pretty much everyone, right? Japheth and Ethan, you have something to share about your own takeaway?
Japheth, do you have anything?
Yeah, I find it quite insightful. I mean, more on the empathy point, but I guess the one thing, like what Ethan said, right, integrating other people's perspective and making my own, is it reinforces my own belief around the wellness movement as well, right? So I think a lot of people just don't have the space to share about this. So it's okay not to be okay really help people to relate that actually I'm not only the only person feeling all my insecurity and it's normal to feel that way. In the same way, like what Chris has mentioned, right? The traumas are common. There's not like I have traumas means I am the special problem child that needs to be fixed in society lah. But it's more common than you think. And part of it, I guess, manifested through all the mental wellness pressures that people are facing lah. And this is probably the right way to get people to start to be in a position to talk about it, empathize with others, relate to others, realize that they are not alone, and it's okay not to be okay lah. So that I thought this was an insightful session that helps reinforce that perspective. Yeah.
Thanks, Japheth.
For me, I'm just glad that today I managed to explain such a very complex concept in this 1.5 hours, and hopefully empowered each person to be able to understand a bit more about how to get to the next point. It's, for me, trying to explain this, especially from the Aspergic mind. So I have Asperger's, which is also one of the reasons, was part of my traumas. Therefore, I have my perspective of the world. And therefore, the ability to explain this was also a lot of traumas to be overcome to get to this point where I can even share this with you guys. So that's why I also, and like the thing is, right, it's a non-stop journey. And as long as we keep working on ourselves, we can help other people. And that's my goal also.
Awesome. Thanks. So thanks everyone for joining us today. If you're not already on the Meetup platform, please join us. And that's where we post all our events. And we have one more session, I think for this year, because we probably will not have the session near Christmas. So it's really end of November. So the next session, mid-December, we'll have one more. And then we'll probably the last session for the year. So Ethan, Jeff and myself will kind of gather and talk about what that last session will be. If you have any suggestions on what you'd like it to be, please drop me an email or message. And then I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. Good night. Take care.
Good night. Rest well.